I opened my eyes to the blinding glow of the chandelier in the Carter family living room, the same overly grand room I died in once before, except this time, I wasn't strapped to a medical bed or drugged out of my mind. I was just sitting quietly, dressed like I was about to meet someone important, with my adoptive parents and Ryan Carter, my precious little brother, smiling in front of me like nothing ever happened. But everything had happened. I remembered it all. The betrayal, the drugs, the lies, the years I spent shackled by that woman, Vanessa Collins, who once wore the mask of a powerful heiress but was nothing more than a monster with a pretty face. I remembered Ryan choosing her over the woman who truly loved and terrified him, Emily Walker. And I remembered how that choice killed him. Literally. Trapped and tortured in a basement, dying in silence because he couldn't handle being the plaything of the woman he thought he controlled. He never stood a chance. And now, I was back. Reborn on the exact day Ryan suggested we swap fiancés. "Mom," he said cheerfully, twirling a spoon in his coffee, "don't stress. I'm just saying, Ethan and Emily would get along better. He's always doing science stuff. She's cold as ice. Perfect match. I'll take Vanessa. She's fun." I looked at him. I mean, really looked at him. He had that same smug, cocky grin I remembered from my last moments. That entitled, disgusting look. That was when it hit me. He was reborn too. This wasn't a coincidence. He remembered. He thought he could get a do-over. And once again, he wanted to hand me the CEO known for being emotionally unavailable, while he ran off with the seductive disaster who poisoned us all. My adoptive mother beamed like Ryan had just solved world peace. "Since Ryan has made up his mind," she said sweetly, turning to me, "you'll be marrying into the Walker family instead." Understood? Understood? As if I was just a pawn being moved across the board. Of course, that's exactly what I was to them. A pity adoption to clean up their PR image after my father died during a rescue flood mission and made national headlines. They used me as a poster child for compassion. Raised me just enough to smile in front of cameras but never enough to sit at the table when it mattered. Ryan was the prince. I was the backup generator. In our previous life, I remember when they forced me to go overseas just to babysit Ryan after he failed every college entrance exam. They made me give up my admission to Stanford to follow him like a loyal dog. "Mom," I said calmly back then, "he's an adult. He can travel alone. I have a future too." She slapped me across the face and screamed, "Did I raise you to talk back to me?" That was my place in the Carter family: obedience, utility, silence. Ryan even had the audacity to grin at me after that moment and say, "Brother, your life is mine to arrange. I go east, you go east. I sleep with your fiancé, you say thank you. In this life, try me." That night, Ryan slipped into my room like a rat. The lock had been broken since we were kids, a little trick he used to sneak in and annoy me. He leaned on the edge of my desk like he owned the air I breathed and said, "So, you get the frigid business queen, and I get the rich wild one. You're welcome." I didn't look up. I was working on a wood carving I hadn't touched in years, focused on the final curve of the blade. He shoved my shoulder like a toddler desperate for attention, and the blade nicked his hand. He hissed and looked at me. "You cut me, freak." I handed him a tissue without emotion. "Congratulations, Ryan. You got exactly what you wanted." He sneered. "Don't act smug. When you're locked in a basement like a monk, don't come crying to me." I looked up at him and smirked. "Enjoy Vanessa's multiplayer mode, brother. You'll be the star." His face twisted. He knocked everything off my desk in a tantrum and snapped, "Jealous much? Try not to whine when you see us on magazine covers." The next day, our families met for dinner to formalize the engagement arrangements. Ryan showed up in a sleek suit, grinning like a wolf. Emily Walker walked in like the embodiment of moonlight, poised, graceful, and terrifyingly beautiful. I remembered how she was always misunderstood. People said she was robotic, cold, unapproachable. No one ever asked why. Ryan stared at her like he'd won a prize at a carnival. I walked over and pulled out her chair before he could. "Miss Walker, please," I said, voice calm. She glanced at me, then nodded with a soft, "Thank you." Ryan's face looked like it had been slapped. During the meal, he kept throwing compliments her way, desperate to grab her attention. I handed her a cup of tea and said aloud, "Brother, please. Show some respect to your future sister-in-law." Both of them looked at me at once. Ryan's glare was lethal. "But Emily." She smiled, just faintly, as if she saw something in me for the first time. Then Vanessa Collins made her grand entrance, still in yesterday's hangover makeup, stinking of cigarettes and arrogance. She was perfect for Ryan. In my last life, I didn't know she was only marrying into the family because she needed a buyer for her unexpected pregnancy and messy reputation. High society had no room for her. Only us, the nouveau riche, were desperate enough to accept her. I couldn't wait for Ryan to find that out the hard way. As we finalized the engagement logistics, Ryan practically dragged Vanessa out the door. No doubt heading for some hotel room. Lust before loyalty, as always. I took Emily to a rooftop cafe. "Miss Walker," I said, "I'd like to propose a deal." She arched an eyebrow. "Oh. I assumed this was a date." Her dry humor caught me off guard. I laughed before I could stop myself. She sipped her coffee, then tilted her head. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," I replied. "Most people think you're cold. I think you just haven't met the right temperature." She actually blushed and looked away. "So what's the deal?" "There's a project I know you want. I can help you win it. But I need funding for my research, 20 million. She tapped her fingers, thinking. Then, like a chess master calling checkmate, she raised her coffee cup and smiled. "You've got yourself a partner, Mr. Carter." As we walked back to the car, a golden leaf landed in her hair. I reached out to remove it gently. She looked up at me, eyes shimmering in the sun. I froze, heart doing double time. Then Ryan's voice ruined it all. "Emily, let's go." I turned and saw him sulking like a child. Emily didn't hesitate. She slipped her arm into mine and said, "I'm with my fiancé. You can relax." I didn't let go until we reached the car. Her breath brushed my ear. "Mr. Carter," she whispered, "if you're always this formal, how will we ever fulfill our duties as husband and wife?" My mind blanked out. This woman, this monster in disguise, she wasn't the ice queen people warned me about. She was dangerous. She was electric. She was mine. And Ryan? He had no idea what kind of hell he'd just walked into. The moment Emily leaned close and whispered about fulfilling husband and wife duties, something inside me snapped, not in fear, not in resistance, but in realization. This woman wasn't some iceberg floating through boardrooms with zero expression. She was deliberate, strategic, and playful when she chose to be. She didn't see me as the weak older brother everyone else did. She saw someone capable. Someone worth making deals with. That was more dangerous than love. It meant she could break me, or build me. And I wasn't sure which terrified me more. Back at the Carter house, the first thing that greeted me was a wine bottle flying toward my head. I dodged it instinctively, and Ryan's shrill, drunk voice followed from the top of the staircase. "Ethan. You piece of crap. You embarrassed me in front of Emily." I wiped the splash of red off my cheek and calmly looked up. "She's your sister-in-law now, remember? Maybe act like it." His expression twisted like I'd spat acid in his face. He stormed down and swung a fist at me. I caught it midair and squeezed. "Try again, Ryan." He seethed. "Don't forget who you are. You're just a damn orphan we brought in for PR. Everything you've ever had came from me. You think you deserve Emily?" I twisted his wrist and threw him against the floor with a thud. "I don't think," I said coldly. "I know." He groaned, trying to push himself up like a beetle flipped on its back. Just as he managed to crawl toward the living room, Mrs. Carter burst in wearing silk pajamas, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Ethan! What are you doing to your brother?" She ran to cradle Ryan like he'd just returned from war. "He's hurting me, Mom," Ryan whimpered. "He's gone crazy." She glared at me. "Apologize to your brother right now. Mr. Carter followed, annoyed and reeking of scotch. "What now?" he barked. "Your precious orphan is beating up my son, Mrs. Carter snapped. Without waiting for my side, Mr. Carter walked up and slammed his foot into my ribs, hard enough that I stumbled back and hit the wall. Then he grabbed my collar and snarled, "We took you in out of pity. Don't you dare raise your hand to my son." I looked at him, breath tight from the kick, and said through gritted teeth, "If you knew what I know, you wouldn't be wasting time beating me. You'd be groveling for a bailout." That got his attention. He froze. "What are you talking about?" "Your empire's dying, sir," I said, brushing off his grip. "Investors are leaving. Overseas assets are being flagged. You were going to transfer the debt-ridden company to me and make me the fall guy. Sound familiar?" His face drained. Ryan looked confused, like he just walked into a chess match 5 moves too late. I straightened my shirt. "You better be careful which son you try to sacrifice this time." Then I walked out. No yelling, no slamming doors. Just quiet resolve. 3 days later, I stepped out of the lab and there she was, Emily Walker, standing under the honor wall in our research building, staring at an old photo. It was me. High school, blurry, smiling. I didn't even know anyone had taken that shot. "Why are you here?" I asked, more breathless than I expected. She turned slowly. "Do I need to file a visit request to see my fiancé?" Her tone was neutral, but her eyes burned. "Who hit you?" she asked next, gesturing at the faint bruise on my temple. "Let me guess. Ryan?" I nodded. She didn't comment. Instead, she handed me a file. "You were right. That executive Richard Moore. His history is worse than we thought. Underage boys. Bribery. Coercion. Vanessa's been feeding him people." I took the file, hands steady even as my stomach flipped. "No one understands his sickness better than someone who survived him," I said quietly. She looked up, and I saw something shift behind her expression. Something like pain. But not pity. She got it. I poured her tea, something grounding, and slid a flash drive across the table. "This is everything on the Song Corporation. Financial trails, hidden accounts, blackmail. We take them down together." She didn't say thank you. She just looked at me and said, "Mr. Carter, you've changed." I stared at the rising steam from the teacup. "Do you believe in second lives?" Her voice barely dropped, but it shook. "I dreamed of you," she said. "I dreamed you were dying and I couldn't reach you in time. I woke up crying. I didn't speak. Just reached out, slowly, and brushed her bangs aside. Her skin was warm beneath my fingertips. I snapped back instantly, shocked by my own instinct, but it was too late. Emily leaned forward, grabbed my hand, and backed me against the edge of the desk, her eyes burning into mine. "Why are you hiding?" she whispered. Fiancé. Then she kissed me. Not hesitant. Not shy. Just raw and real. Her lips were soft, but firm with intention. When she finally pulled back, she said with a mischievous smile, "We're getting married anyway. Why not start practicing?" I couldn't help it. I kissed her again. My hands tangled in her hair, her scent like gardenias blooming in spring. My memories of that scent weren't just imagination, it was hers. The little girl I gave flowers to all those years ago. It had been her. This wasn't just fate. It was an overdue reunion. Days later, when she left for a business trip, I tried to distract myself with research, but old shadows started creeping in. I spotted Vanessa Collins at a nearby restaurant with none other than Richard Moore. I followed, quietly, phone recording in my pocket. Behind a decorative fountain, I caught enough of their conversation to confirm everything. She was bargaining again, using me as currency. "He's just a man," she laughed. "Not more important than our partnership." Richard chuckled. "And I always did like my toys loyal." I almost vomited. So it hadn't started at that infamous party like I thought. Their deal went back years. That dinner was just a setup. She wanted to make me a gift to him again. I went to confront her at the bar that night. She greeted me like nothing had changed, like she hadn't tried to sell my body for a contract. "Ethan," she purred, sliding into a private booth. "You miss me already?" I faked a grin. "Actually, I was hoping to get in on your next business deal." She tilted her head. "I thought you were above that kind of thing." "I need options," I said. "My place in the Carter family isn't exactly secure." She offered a drink, laced with something I didn't touch. We made small talk. She gave me an address, told me to show up tomorrow. Might be a chance to impress someone important, she winked. I nodded, hiding my disgust. I had no intention of walking into that trap again. But I'd play along for now. When I left, the sky was already graying. But as I turned the corner, I froze. Emily was standing under a street lamp, arms crossed, eyes locked on me. Ryan was behind her, smirking like the rat he was. "See," he said. "Told you he couldn't be trusted." My heart dropped. "Emily," but she stepped forward, hand raised, and slapped me across the face. Hard. "We're done," she said coldly. Then walked away, leaving my world cracked open. Ryan cackled behind me like a cartoon villain, muttering, "Lou the clown," as he strutted off. But deep down, I knew she was smarter than that. This wasn't the end. Not even close. For 3 days, I didn't hear a word from Emily Walker, not a call, not a message, not even a forwarded news article, which for someone like her was practically a breakup notice, and yet somehow the silence wasn't loud enough to drown out the fake sympathy plastered across my adoptive parents' faces when they showed up at my place, acting like they'd forgotten their decades-long campaign to make me feel disposable, sitting on my couch and offering warm smiles like we were suddenly family, like they hadn't just stood by while Ryan tried to destroy me socially, physically, and financially, like they weren't the same people who raised me as a placeholder while grooming Ryan to be the golden child, and this time, instead of scolding me for supposedly upsetting the Shin family, or rather, Emily, they brought a different message, one that reeked of ulterior motives and desperation wrapped in faux concern, and I knew it the second my adoptive father cleared his throat and said, "Zio Quansari. Ethan, we've been thinking it's time you took over the company," and just like that I knew their empire had started to rot, knew they were planning to dump their problems on me under the guise of inheritance, knew this offer wasn't a reward, it was a coffin with my name etched in gold, so I smiled and played along, feigned surprise and said, "But what about Ryan?" and my adoptive father waved me off like it was nothing, like Ryan's opinion didn't matter, and my mother chimed in with that tight-lipped smile she used when she was scheming, saying, "You're the older brother, of course you should help the family now," and I agreed, oh so politely, knowing damn well they expected me to walk straight into a legal meat grinder, to sign away my life for the privilege of wearing the Carter name one last time. And when they left reminding me not to breathe a word to Ryan, Yeti sat in the dim light of my apartment and let the silence wrap around me like armor, because I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was calculating, waiting, sharpening my claws for the moment I'd tear down everything they built on my back, and that moment came quicker than I expected, at a family dinner where Ryan stood up halfway through dessert, raising his wine glass and grinning like a fool as he announced, "Vanessa's pregnant," and just like that, Mrs. Carter clapped like she was at a baby shower and said, "We're moving the wedding up," and Mr. Carter toasted with a proud nod, and for a second it all looked so picture-perfect, until Ryan turned to me and smirked, "Brother, haven't you fixed things with Emily yet? Everyone's talking about how your engagement's doomed," and I didn't even flinch, just met his gaze and said, "Even if Emily leaves me, it's not like you're the Shin family's son-in-law," which earned a few awkward coughs around the table, and Ryan, never one to lose, quietly picked up a bowl and flung it at me, barely missing my head, and then stormed over and leaned into my ear, hissing, "You came from nothing, and you'll go back to nothing. You'll never be more than a street rat dressed in borrowed silk," and for a moment I wanted to laugh, because if only he knew how deep his grave had already been dug, how I'd let him walk himself right into a debt-ridden marriage contract that would bleed him dry, but I said nothing, not yet, not until it was time to strike, and that time came a week later when I was summoned to Mr. Carter's office to finalize the transfer papers, where he handed me a pen with a cold smile and said, "Sign it, son," and I looked at the contract with all its traps and smiled back, asking, "Dad, do you feel guilty?" And the way his face twitched told me everything I needed, how little he thought of me, how easily he'd throw me under the bus to save his real son, so I stalled, counted silently to 32. Just long enough for the door to fly open and for Ryan to charge in like a storm, snatching the papers from the desk and yelling, "What the hell is this? You're giving him the company?" And Mr. Carter panicked, reaching out to calm him down, saying, "Let him sign first, I'll explain," but Ryan was already unraveling, veins popping in his neck, spit flying as he screamed, "You'd give everything to the adopted bastard," and I didn't say a word, just quietly stepped out and let the explosion go off behind me, because Ryan had just inherited everything, every debt, every legal risk, every toxic asset, and once he signed, it would all become joint marital debt with Vanessa, the perfect couple. Trapped in their perfect little hell, and all I had to do was watch, and as I left the building the rain had stopped, the sun had come out, and a white Mercedes sat waiting by the curb, and when I slid in, Emily didn't even look at me, just drove straight to her place, where she poured us both a glass of vintage red wine and sat on the balcony like nothing had happened, until she finally broke the silence and said, "You could have told me your plan," and I chuckled, touching the cheek she'd slapped and said, "That reaction was intense," and she laughed, "You deserved it," then handed me a file full of names, dates, evidence, confirming everything I suspected. Vanessa had met Richard Moore 5 years ago at an auction, and since then she'd been his loyal recruiter, feeding him boys, some of them underage, some tricked, some coerced, all victims crushed by the same system that protected people like them, and I looked at Emily's expression, the fire behind her calm voice, and knew she understood more than I'd ever guessed. So I asked the question that had haunted me, "You never doubted me," and she looked me dead in the eye and said, "I knew you before you knew me, Ethan Carter. How could I not believe you?" And that hit harder than anything Ryan had ever said, because it wasn't just trust, it was history, it was love forged in silence, and as the night deepened and she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, I stayed by her side, guarding her in the dark, promising silently that no one would ever touch her again, and when dawn came I kissed her forehead and left before she could wake up, not out of guilt, but because I wanted her next memory of me to be filled with light, not shadows. And 1 month later, at the wedding of Ryan Carter and Vanessa Collins, I sat in the front row, dressed sharp, silent, watching the stage as the MC chirped about love and destiny, and when he cued the VCR of their romantic journey, the screen flickered and then all hell broke loose, because instead of a slideshow of happy memories, the venue was flooded with security footage, audio recordings, videos of Richard Moore and Vanessa colluding, of Ryan being restrained, humiliated, used, every guest watching in horror, every camera streaming it live, and when Ryan realized what was happening, he screamed and kicked Vanessa off the stage, sending her tumbling, clutching her stomach, wailing in pain, but the damage was done. The scandal hit trending in seconds, the arrests followed within days, the Carter family collapsed under the weight of public disgust, the Song Corporation disintegrated. And through it all, I never said a word, never took credit, just smiled quietly and said, "Why aren't you smiling, Ryan? It's your happy day, isn't it?" And as he sat there, pale and broken on the stage, I knew I had finally won the war they thought I'd never survive. It had been 3 months since the wedding day meltdown, since Ryan Carter's scream echoed across a live broadcast viewed by millions, since Vanessa Collins was dragged off stage with her reputation in flames and the Carter name officially blacklisted by every decent investor on the East Coast, since the Shin family's stock doubled overnight and Emily Walker became the rising legend of the financial world again, and in that time, we barely saw each other, not out of avoidance, but because we were both busy rebuilding what we'd lost in different ways, her managing crisis PR, consolidating assets, and reshaping the boardroom with fire in her eyes and scars on her skin, and me throwing myself into my lab work with a vengeance that bordered on obsession, securing funding for a multi-year biogenetics project, earning federal recognition, and, for once in my life, becoming known for something other than being Ryan's charity case or the family's human shield. But no matter how many meetings I crushed or contracts she closed, there was a silence that hung between us, something unfinished, something unsaid, and it followed me until the afternoon she appeared outside my lab building, dressed simply in a cream blazer and dark jeans, no makeup, hair tied back lazily, holding a coffee in one hand and a folder in the other like it was just another Thursday, and when she saw me, she didn't speak, just handed me the folder and said, "There's something you should know," and inside were photos. News clippings, fragments of memory pieced together like a puzzle only she knew how to solve, showing me connections between Richard Moore, Vanessa, and a string of missing boys, some as young as 15, silenced by settlements, non-disclosure agreements, or worse, and I swallowed the lump in my throat as I flipped through each page, recognizing one of the names from a cocktail party in my past life. A boy who vanished after one night of forced laughter and too many cameras, and when I looked up at Emily, she didn't look away. She said, "This is why I didn't hesitate to slap you that night," and I nodded slowly, because now I understood it wasn't betrayal, it was strategy, it was the only move she could make to protect us both from getting gutted in the crossfire too early, and I respected the hell out of it, even if it hurt like hell in the moment, so I closed the folder and said, "You Chu," using her Chinese nickname for the first time in years, the name I heard whispered once in a dream and somehow never forgot, and her eyes flickered with something soft, like a candle refusing to go out. "Come with me," she said, and we got in her car and drove without speaking until we reached our old high school on the outskirts of town, a place I hadn't set foot in since the day I gave up my Stanford letter to babysit Ryan in London, the place I buried everything I ever wanted, and as we walked through the rusted front gates, the security guard squinted at us, then smiled with vague recognition. "Xiaochu, you're all grown up now, huh?" And she laughed awkwardly. "Uncle Wang, I'm just visiting, showing my boyfriend around," and I blinked, caught off guard by how natural it sounded coming from her, but I didn't correct her, didn't need to, not anymore, and once we were inside, she led me to the old hallway where the honor wall still stood, faded and dusty, and pointed to a photo half torn at the corner. "That one," she said. I took it, and I stepped closer and saw myself at 16, standing near the library, grinning at something off camera, probably holding a physics trophy or whatever nerdy thing I was into back then. "You always looked so serious in class," she said softly, "but that day, you laughed," and I remember thinking, he doesn't even know I exist, and suddenly it all made sense, the way she'd glance at me back then, the way she disappeared for weeks after I left, and the story she told me once, disguised as fiction, about a girl who waited in a bookstore for a boy who never came back. "I bought you a book," she said, "you gave it to me when I was crying over not getting the last copy," and I staggered a little under the weight of it, of the years we missed, the chances we never took, and I grabbed her hand. "Grounding myself in the present, Emily. Why didn't you ever say anything?" And she shrugged. "You left, and I thought maybe it was just me, holding on to something that wasn't real," and I pulled her into my arms before she could finish that thought, because I wasn't going to let her rewrite the past like it didn't matter, like she didn't matter, not when she was the only constant thread in a life full of chaos and manipulation, not when she was the only person who saw me before the world tried to erase me, I should have found you sooner, I whispered into her hair, and she leaned into me like she'd been waiting to fall for years. You did, she whispered back, you just didn't know it, and we stood there in the echoing quiet of that dusty old hallway, the air filled with memories and unfinished promises, and I realized then that no revenge, no takedown, no public spectacle could ever compare to Thisto being held by someone who saw you at your worst and stayed anyway. And that night, as we walked out of the school, she tugged my hand and asked, will you come with me to the bookstore? And I said yes, not because of nostalgia, but because it felt like the right place to start again, and we ended up in the same backstreet shop where we used to sit there at one table, me at another, years apart but unknowingly tethered by shared space. And she pulled a dusty old book from the shelf, the same one I'd given her once, and said, this time, I'm giving it back to you. And when I opened it, my old high school ID card fell out, and scrawled on the back was a single sentence in her handwriting, you've always been my hero, and I stared at it for a long moment before kissing her, not out of gratitude, not out of guilt, but because there was no other way to thank someone for loving me before I even knew how to exist, and in that kiss was everything we lost and everything we could still build. And as we walked out under the cherry blossom trees in full bloom, I realized that spring had come again, not just outside, but in my chest, thawing the cold, reminding me that even after all the storms, some things still bloom. And just as we reached the car, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number that read, you thought it was over? The Carters weren't the only ones who wanted to break you. See you soon. RM, and my entire body tensed, because I knew that signature, knew that Richard Moore hadn't gone down quietly, and while Emily leaned against the car, humming under her breath like nothing had changed, I stared at that message and realized we weren't done, not yet, and whatever came next, I'd have to protect her with everything I had, because the game had just entered a new level, and this time, the real monsters were stepping out of the shadows. The message from Richard Moore haunted me for days, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed what I had already started to sense in the background noise of my daily life, the subtle shifts in how people looked at me during meetings, the phone calls that went dead when I answered, the vague invitations to exclusive mixers sent by anonymous assistants from faceless shell companies, and while I didn't respond to any of it, I knew Moore was alive and watching, regrouping in the shadows. Like the cockroach he was, and if there was one thing worse than a monster, it was a monster with nothing left to lose. So I stayed quiet, pretended to move on, continued presenting at biotech symposiums and reviewing data sets like nothing had changed, all while slowly tracing the edges of Moore's reassembled network through offshore company filings, dark web rumors, and whispers from the same underground circles that once preyed on people like me. And every night, when Emily was asleep, curled beside me with one hand on my chest like she needed to physically confirm I was still breathing, I would stare at the ceiling and run worst-case scenarios through my head like a machine, because I knew that if Moore couldn't control me, he'd try to erase me, and I wasn't about to let that happen, not when I had something to live for now, not when I had someone to protect. And it all came to a head the night of the Foundation Gala, one of those pretentious charity events where billionaires pretended to care about the world while clinking overpriced champagne, and Emily had to attend as the face of the Shen family's rebrand, dressed in a midnight blue gown that made half the room stare and the other half whisper, and I was just her plus one, the invisible man in a tailored tux who followed 3 steps behind and smiled politely while memorizing every detail of the guest list. And sure enough, in the far corner of the ballroom, sipping from a crystal flute and surrounded by new, unrecognizable faces, stood a man with Richard Moore's eyes but none of his former charm, a ghost in a borrowed name. And when our eyes met, he didn't flinch or hide. Instead, he raised his glass to me with a crooked smile like he already knew the ending of the story, and I swear the entire room went colder by 10 degrees, but I didn't move, didn't show even a flicker of emotion, just turned to Emily and asked if she wanted a refill, then slipped away before she could answer, not toward Moore, but toward the ballroom security director, a man I'd paid discreetly weeks ago for full access to camera feeds and emergency protocols. And within 5 minutes, Moore was escorted out, not publicly, not loudly, but cleanly, exactly how I planned it, because I didn't need a scene, I needed control, and I wasn't going to give him the attention he so desperately wanted. And while most people would have gone home satisfied, I stayed late, met with 2 government liaisons in an underground parking lot, and handed over the flash drive I'd been compiling since the day I received Moore's message, full of evidence not just against him, but against the secondary pipeline of abusers who had begun circling again now that the waters were murky, names that had never gone public, photos I wish I could unsee, and payment logs from anonymous crypto wallets tied back to foundations and clubs that claimed to support youth education. And the agents didn't say much, but I knew by the weight of their silence that things were about to move, and they did over the next few weeks. Half a dozen quiet arrests, a sudden audit into a luxury education fund in LA, a congressional inquiry into digital asset laundering, and through it all, Moore vanished again, like he always did, but this time, I had the upper hand, because now I had people and places that mattered, and more importantly, I had a reason to fight smarter, not just harder, and maybe that's why I didn't see the real danger coming not from Moore, but from someone I had forgotten entirely, someone who had once stood quietly in the background of my past life, just another assistant with too much access and too little attention, and her name was Zoe Carter-Ryan's ex-girlfriend, former social media darling turned digital ghost after the Carter family collapsed. And I hadn't heard her name in months until a package arrived at the lab one rainy Thursday morning with no sender listed, just my name in blocky handwriting and a USB drive. Inside, and against every protocol I'd ever followed, I plugged it into an isolated terminal, expecting some kind of petty threat or clickbait leak, but instead, I found hours of recordings, raw and unedited, of conversations between Ryan and Vanessa, conversations that made my skin crawl, especially one where Ryan bragged about how Zoe helped him set up hidden cameras in Emily's condo before our engagement, laughing like it was the world's funniest prank, and suddenly I remembered why Zoe had always seemed off to me, how she'd linger near Emily at parties with that fake sweet voice and too perfect smile, how she used to accidentally post pictures of Emily in private settings then delete them seconds later, blaming it on glitches, and now I realized she'd been a spectator to everything, maybe even a co-conspirator, and I had no idea where she was or what she wanted until the second message came, this time directly to my phone, with a clip of Emily exiting her car and an audio file of Zoe's voice saying, "You took everything from me, Ethan. Time to return the favor," and I swear my blood froze, because this wasn't about power or money anymore, this was obsession, something deeper and sicker, and the next 2 hours were a blur of calls to security, to Emily's assistant, to the police, to anyone who could help me track her down, and by the time I got to Emily's building, she was safe but shaken, having found a photo pinned to her door of us kissing at the bookstore weeks ago, marked with a lipstick print that wasn't hers, and she didn't cry, didn't scream, just looked at me and said, "Who is she?" And I told her the truth, all of it, and for a moment she said nothing, just held my gaze like she was searching for cracks, then nodded and whispered, "Okay. We fix this," and I think that was the moment I truly understood what partnership meant, not just the kind where you hold hands at corporate events or co-sign mortgage papers, but the kind where you face down ghosts together, where you trust each other even when it would be easier not to, and that night, as she sat beside me with her knees pulled to her chest, scrolling through Zoe's old accounts and digital footprints, I stared at her profile and realized how fragile peace really is, how quickly it can be shattered by someone who doesn't know how to let go, and I promised myself, no matter what it took, no matter how ugly the past got, no one would ever touch her again, not while I was still breathing. It happened on a Sunday, quiet and deceptively sunny, the kind of morning where the light makes everything look softer than it is, where if I hadn't already been living in the aftermath of too many betrayals, I might have believed for a second that the world was normal again, that people like Zoe Carter didn't exist, that love could just be love without having to fight monsters to earn it. But that illusion broke the moment my phone buzzed and a new video file dropped in. Emily, tied to a chair, blindfolded, lips pressed together like she was holding back a scream, with Zoe's voice narrating calmly in the background like she was directing an indie film. "You said she was different, Ethan. You said she saved you. I just want to see what saving looks like when she's begging," and the fury that exploded in my chest was the kind of rage that doesn't bend, it freezes, it crystallizes, it sharpens everything inside you until every breath you take is a calculation, and I didn't waste time calling the cops because I knew Zoe wouldn't leave a digital trail that obvious, not this time. Not after being off-grid for months. So instead I activated the GPS tracker I'd placed in the lining of Emily's favorite bracelet. Weeks ago when I started sensing something off, and it pinged from an old Carter family estate out in Ridgeview, long since sold but still under my name on a technicality because no one had bothered to refile the deed after the family collapse, and I drove like a man possessed, not thinking, just moving, a gun tucked in the glove compartment, a scalpel in my coat pocket, and a knot in my throat I couldn't swallow down no matter how tightly I gripped the wheel, because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about the one person in the world who had chosen me without expectation, who had kissed my brokenness like it was sacred and called it home, and when I kicked the door in and stepped into that dusty, rotting house, the first thing I heard was Zoe laughing, high-pitched and hollow, like something cracked open too long ago to ever seal again. "I knew you'd come," she said, stepping out of the shadows in a red dress and heels that didn't belong in this century, holding a phone in one hand and a knife in the other, like a sick parody of power, and behind her, I saw Emily tied to a chair in the center of the room, face pale, but eyes clear, sharp, focused on me the second I entered like she knew I'd find her, like she never doubted it, and I raised my hands slowly, not because I was scared, but because I needed Zoe to believe she still had control. "Let her go," I said, voice low, steady. Ice beneath the rage, and Zoe smiled like a girl at prom. "You never looked at me the way you look at her. Even when I stood beside Ryan, I saw you. Always too clean for your own good, always the quiet hero in the corner pretending to be invisible," and I kept her talking, inching closer with every word, mentally mapping the distance between her and Emily, between me and the knife. "You chose her because she looks like she needs saving," Zoe snapped, "but I loved you before she ever did," and I said nothing, just took one more step and then moved, fast and clean, grabbing her wrist and slamming it against the wall, the knife clattering to the floor as she screamed and clawed at me, but I didn't stop, didn't flinch, just yanked the phone from her hand and tossed it across the room before cutting Emily free with the same blade she'd been threatened with, and the second Emily stood, she didn't collapse or cry. She punched Zoe across the face with a precision I didn't know she had, and Zoe went down hard, moaning something incoherent about how we were supposed to be the same, how none of this was fair, and Emily didn't even blink. Just grabbed my hand and said, "Let's go," and I drove us out of Ridgeview with one hand on the wheel and the other gripping hers like it was the only thing keeping me upright, and the silence between us wasn't awkward. It was survival, it was trust in its purest form, and when we got back to the apartment, I expected her to pull away, to go take a shower, to need space, but instead she walked straight into my arms and didn't let go, not for hours, and when I asked her if she was okay, she said, "I was never afraid of her. I was afraid you'd blame yourself again," and I didn't answer because she was right. I would have carried that weight, I always do, because that's what happens when you grow up believing your pain is proof of your worth, and when the cops finally called saying Zoe had been picked up wandering barefoot along the highway, muttering about how the story had the wrong ending, I didn't even feel anything, not anger, not pity, just nothing, because some ghosts deserve to stay ghosts. And in the weeks that followed, Emily and I did what no one thought we would. We disappeared, not completely, but quietly, slipping out of headlines and boardrooms, letting the world move on without us for once, and we bought a small house near the ocean, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows and too many bookshelves and a garden neither of us knew how to take care of yet. And she wore sweaters that didn't match, and I let my hair grow longer than I ever had, and sometimes we'd lie on the floor just listening to the rain like we were 19 again and still allowed to dream. And one night, as we sat on the back deck drinking tea, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about who we would have been if none of it happened?" And I looked at her, at the woman who once saved me with a single look across a classroom, at the CEO who kissed me like she owned the stars, and said, "No, because whoever they were, they didn't get here. We did," and she smiled, slow and full and real, and I kissed her like I'd been waiting to all my life, because maybe I had, because this was the real ending, not the revenge, not the ruin, but the peace we carved out of the wreckage, the love that bloomed in soil no one believed could grow anything, and in that moment, I knew I'd do it all over again, every betrayal, every heartbreak, every twisted thread of fate, if it meant ending up here with her, alive, unbroken, and finally, free.